Hey guys, welcome back to Primer Podcast. My name is Jessica Flake. I'm part of the spiritual formation team here, back with Pete for our second week of the Big Fish.
That's right.
Just talking about and learning more about the story of Jonah, and it's been surprising to learn some new things about this very short book in the Bible. It's such a short book, and so I think a lot of times we think of it as just something to read fast, quickly, and just kind of, like I said last week, something I didn't think about too much other than Vacation Bible School.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. It's like there's so much visual and emotive imagery that's used in the book of Jonah that requires us to slow down. Mm-hmm. There's almost a piece where every word has been carefully chosen by the author to evoke, something in us, and to challenge us to really wrestle through what this means for us, what's going on with Jonah. We're starting this week in verse 4. And it says, "But the Lord hurled a powerful wind on the sea. Such a violent tempest arose on the sea that the ship threatened to break up." I find that the ship is personified, right? Mm-hmm. It has this emotion. The Hebrew there is a word that would be closer to the ship considered breaking up. Mm. The storm was so bad that even the ship was considering giving up in this moment, right? And then so what's happening here, and why is this? Why is the author choosing these words? What implications does that have for me? And how in some ways is God using this this narrative to also be transcendent. So this is an interesting piece. What comes to mind when you think of the word prophecy or a prophet?
A prophet, when I think of prophet, is someone that is so close to God.
Yeah.
That is that continued conversation, and God is in the prophet's ear. Yeah. Guiding him to say the words that he wants. Yeah. Those of us that would listen to hear, to say those words and say his words to his people. And so I feel like the prophet or the prophecy is more of straight from God.
Okay. But what are what's the implications of a prophecy? What's it communicating?
What God's going to do.
Yeah. Okay, so there's this feeling of what God's going to do, and I appreciate. I think you probably have a perspective that's a little bit more aligned with the intent of prophecy, but maybe this speaks to my own kind of juvenile way of thinking. And in some cases, I think about fortune telling a lot of time with prophecy of this is God saying the future, right? This is going to happen, and it's a marked point historically. And so then prophecy that is happening in the ancient world then has already reached its fulfillment, right? It's been, the fortune teller has said what is to come, and then it has either come or God has spared them from it. But what's really interesting, I love Scott McKnight writes a lot about the role of prophecy, and he talks about prophecy as, do you remember in the classroom when you had the overhead slide projectors? Mm-hmm. And I feel like my teacher always would forget to pull the screen down, right? And so then the overhead's layered over whatever's on the background there, and then they remember, they pull down the screen. And he talks about prophecy as being like an overhead projector that's layered on top of cultures from the beginning of time till now. Yeah. Right? And I think sometimes we forget that Jonah is not only a narrative, but it's a prophecy. And so we can look at these elements in this story and say, where is that layered over the world we're living in today? And so it has these rich implications because, yes, it was a historical point in time, but also it is this kind of transcendent, translucent, projector overhead over our lives and culture now.
So is it in that way? Like, I also think of prophecy as like God's will.
Yeah.
Right. So like how we can make plans, but yet, so that's kind of that background, what the background is looking at. And then yet God's will is kind of over it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it should overshadow our plans.
Right.
And so like I almost see it in that sense of like the prophets are the ones that are telling us, or telling in the Bible, telling, hey, this is what is going to be in the future. Right. This is God's will. And yet sometimes we still, even though like Jonah had other plans, right? Like he thought his way was better.
Yeah.
And you said that last week. Yeah. In the sense of, well, I see this with God's wills coming up, but maybe we have different plans in some way.
Well, yeah, and I think because prophecy is a reminder within the context of now how God's will like applies within our culture, or within the culture of Nineveh. Is like there's this picture that God's will never changes. It's not, we live in this world where over the course of our lives, our desires change, our hopes change, our plans for the future change. We talked about this a few weeks ago on Easter, when it was like, I wanted to be an astronaut that was also digging for dinosaurs, right? That didn't happen for me, right? My will changed. God's will doesn't change.
Yeah.
And so part of prophecy is speaking in the never-changing will of God, the redemptive narrative of God's desire in this world, into a constantly changing culture. And so that's totally what's happening here. So with that in mind, read verses, if you don't mind reading verse 4 and 5, and let's talk about that for a little bit.
Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea and lightened the ship. But Jonah had gone down below the deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep.
Awesome. So with this idea of kind of that overhead projector or prophecy applying to us, what is our ship in today's world? Like, what is that ship that's threatening to fall apart?
Our plans and what our vision of what we had thought might have played out for our lives.
Yeah.
Or this was our expectation.
Yeah.
Whether it's expectation of I was going to have, kids by the time I'm this age.
Yeah. Okay.
Expectation to be married at a certain age, expectation to have this home.
Yeah.
But yet the will of God, it may have been different. Or I also feel like sometimes our decisions may have made some things a little different in our lives because of things that we had.
Yeah, our encountering of storms.
Yeah.
And so we see two people react. So I think that's insightful. Is I think that whether it's our specific will from a person or it's our culture's will or expectation of what the world is, and there are seasons of life where that threatens to kind of crumble and fall apart. How do you see? So we have two different kind of reactions to this storm, two different reactions to this ship that's threatening to break up. We have the sailors and we have Jonah. What do you see in the differences between their two reactions?
Well, the sailors, of course, were afraid. I think a lot of that might be because they didn't have any clue that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
And not that Jonah knew exactly what was going to happen, but he knew his God. And so, Jonah's asleep, not caring at all. And the sailors that don't know God at all are just frightened and want to figure out what's going on. And Jonah just does not seem to care. He's just asleep. And I think of like how a lot of times our decisions in our lives can reap, others around us can have those moments of they don't know what's going on with us.
Yeah.
But yet we don't care.
Yeah.
Like, our parents, we may be making decisions that they are looking at us and thinking, why are you making these decisions?
Yeah.
And they know that there's something's not quite right.
Right.
But yet we don't care at all. And, but yet as Christians, we know, like Jonah, he knows God is chasing after him. And, so.
And he's almost accepted the consequences for his decision. Like, he is so done at this point, right? Where it's like he's not even afraid of the storm, because it would be better to succumb to the storm than to go to Nineveh in his perspective. And
he even says it.
Yeah, and yet these sailors are on the ship that are, they're impacted by his resignation. Mm-hmm. And they are now calling out on anything that they can find to help, save them from the storm. It conjures to mind Matthew 5, verses 14 through 16, where it says, "You are the light of the world. A city located on a hill cannot be hidden. People do not light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people, so that they can see your good deeds and give honor to your Father in heaven." Mm-hmm. Right? There's this picture happening here where like Jonah is the church in many ways here, or Jonah is this individual Christian that has bought into this idea that, well, hey, this is my personal walk of faith, and so what I decide to do or not do impacts me and me alone, and it's up to the sailors to figure that out on their own. And here in Jonah, as well as in Matthew 5, there's this like remarkable connection and responsibility of Jonah knowing the true God, knowing where these storms have come from, of us knowing the solution to the brokenness and the hurt of the world, to say, are we going to take that light, that truth, that will, and place it under a bowl? Are we going to hide that light? Right. Or are we going to recognize that we play a remarkable part in the redemption of the world around us? And that's where I think there's these heavy implications for us in Jonah that says, sure, we're not running from Nineveh, but how often has our decision to just be apathetic to what's happening around us robbed our world the opportunity to experience the light of Christ, because we've said, this is mine. Yeah. And I'm hiding it there. So read real quick. Let's jump forward into verses 11 and 12. Yeah, read 11 and 12, I guess. So Jonah has now come up out from under the deck, and they've drawn lots, which is, again, at this time, it's an ancient way of determining God's will, right? The lots have fallen on Jonah, and basically what these lots demonstrate is not necessarily that Jonah's at fault, but in an ancient world that Jonah knows the answer. Okay. He knows how to calm this storm. And so pick it up in 11 and 12 there.
The sea was getting rougher and rougher. So they asked him, "What should we do to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will calm. I know that this is my fault, and that this great storm has come upon you."
Okay. So what do you notice about what is Jonah's solution to the storm, and what sticks out about that solution?
He's just saying to throw him overboard, because he knows that God is angry at him, or not really even anger. Maybe it's not an anger, right? Maybe it's he has this will that he's going to do in Jonah's life, And so he is causing Jonah to wake up.
Right.
And then, but Jonah's solution is just he would rather die.
Yeah.
And so to tell the sailors, well, I know that this is my fault.
Right.
And so how many times I think of like our own lives, sometimes we make mistakes and we say, I know that these implications that are affecting you, they're my fault. Right. So let me just leave. You don't want to be around me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this defeatist mentality here. And what I find interesting is, just to your point, Jonah's solution is just to say, God is punishing me, and just to say, okay, throw me in, let me die.
Yeah.
But I don't think God's punishing him.
Right.
And what's God doing? God is creating a barrier towards pursuing the very thing that won't bring God's will in this world, which is restoration and redemption.
Right. And
I don't think the solution at all is to just be thrown overboard. Mm-hmm. The solution is turn the ship to Nineveh.
Right.
And that, like, why is this storm coming? Because I am trying to go the opposite direction that God is leading me. How can the storm go away? I start going to where God is leading me. And yet instead he just says, just throw me overboard. Mm-hmm. And then at least you'll be free of me that's causing a consequence for you. But there's this beauty here where I think sometimes we do run, and to your point, we feel like the only solution is to give up. Mm-hmm. And we feel like I've blown it so bad. I have I'm not deserving of God. I can't turn towards God. And so our solution is just to give up. Right. And instead, God is inviting us to say there's never a point where you've turned too far, right? And we're going to see next week that there's literally never a point where you've turned too far. Even as you're sinking into the depths of a stormy sea, God is going to provide a way to be restored into his will. The final one I want to look at is just looking at verse 15 and 16. So they picked Jonah up and threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped raging. The men feared the Lord greatly and earnestly vowed to offer lavish sacrifices to the Lord. So what happens to these sailors that don't know God and now have witnessed God's power? What's their response?
Yeah, they turned to a Lord that they didn't know.
Right.
And truthfully, I think of it in the sense of Jonah's mission was to go to Nineveh to tell them to turn from their wickedness and turn back towards God. And yet God did the same thing for the sailors.
Yeah.
He allowed what Jonah said, which was not anything
right
good. He basically just said, kill me.
Yeah.
But yet God still used that to change those sailors' hearts. And even though I think that gives us a thought too, is that, maybe that's a way to say that, even in times that we might not think that we're going in the direction that we want to, others are watching us and learning who God is through us, even at times that we don't think it's what we wanted.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but we so often tell testimonies that have a nice bow on top, and we think that's the one that's gonna change people. And when we're honest with our hurt and with our brokenness and with our failure, even when we're not doing again what the intention is God's going to use those things for His glory. God's will is not bound by our failure and our mistake. God's will finds a way. Yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful picture of that here, and hopefully an encouragement for us as we're engaging in this conversation in our groups and in our personal study.
Yeah, so hope you guys enjoy your study time together, and make sure you click the link below for the study guide questions, and we'll see you next week.